How's it going, everyone? Bryce here with the Soul Ward, and I've got a special guest with me today. She's going to remain mostly anonymous, and so we're going to refer to her as Nova. And Nova, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into your story.
A little bit about me. I'm still trying to figure out who I am and what I want to do with myself and things like that. When you leave, after leaving a cult, you have to sort of reinvent yourself and lose the ego that, made you believe that you were like a lesser version of yourself. The ego kind of tends to hold on to negativity and judgment that is suppressing our ability to express ourselves and experience who we really are, right? So I'm just trying to lose, I guess I don't want to say lose ego, but like learn my lessons in finding who my authentic self really is. And I'm into I'm into art. I like to help people. I like to learn about psychology. I like to learn about like metaphysical, spiritual things now. So, um, yeah, I like video games and I love cats, and I think that's about it.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're definitely right within the target of our community within the Soul Ward. Yeah, a lot of good interest there. And so let's get into you also just kind of mentioned right then and there that you're coming out of a cult, and so let's get into that. And then if we have time at the end, I've got some fun questions that are, as you said, you're still kind of figuring yourself out and figuring out, kind of reinventing, I would call it probably a whole like new way of belief or a systematic of your own thoughts.
Yeah.
So I've got some really cool worldview questions that are used by a philosopher named James Sire to help us contextualize any worldview and kind of figure out where we're at. And so those will be
Okay.
fun to get to at the end, I think. But yeah, so tell us, how did you were you born into this cult, or were you
No.
okay? So
And
so
and
how'd you
that
find it?
that's what's really unique about my story is that I was not born into it because it's a different context for the people that were born into it and leave it. I think it's way harder for them than people who were converted and then left, because the mind control of Mormonism is really, really, really strong. And I know this because I was called, in the Mormon church, we have these things called calling, where the bishop he like gets you to his office and he's like, "Hey, you have been called to serve in the primary for 6 and 7 year old kids, right?" So the whole idea about serving and calling in Mormonism is that it is not the bishop calling you to serve; it is God telling the bishop to tell you that you need to serve, right? So, and of course, I was like really young. I was and got into the Mormon church when I was 13 years old. I was in it for 5 years, right? About 5 years or so, yeah. Um, and for those people that are born into the church, the mind control is really big. And like I said, I was called to teach, and this was around the time that I was about to graduate. And I noticed this because when I studied cults, they like to give people jobs in the church, like these callings. And the thing is, the callings, like you don't get paid anything, right? Except I'm not sure, but I think the bishops do, and also the apostles and the prophets. I'm not sure about like we have a other kind of ranking or whatever kind of higher authority. I think they're called like quorum of the 70 or something like that, and that's I don't always understand a little bit. That has more to do with like how our churches ran up, but we got the prophet, the 12 apostles, and something called the quorum of the 70. I think those are like representatives from different parts of the world or something like that.
That's very
Um,
interesting. I've heard a lot about Mormonism, but I've never been in it myself. And my context with people who have been Mormon has been mostly like kind of not too much in the church, aside from a friend of mine who's an apostate who was a missionary or served in a mission. But yeah, I've never heard of the Quorum of 70. That's really interesting.
yeah. So
Yeah.
whenever we have like general conference talks where they will broadcast it and everyone can watch the Mormon general conference, there's like a whole bunch of people, like it's like this giant church, and there's like a huge organ, a huge, really big organ. And then you see like the prophet, the 12 apostles, the choir, and then there's like all these other like men. Um, and those are like the quorum of the 70. And sometimes they would speak, and then sometimes the apostles will speak, and then sometimes there'll be a woman speaking, or something like that. We have different general conference talks for uh for gender, for like what we have in the Mormonism is like called young women's, young men, right? So like we'll have conference talks for just the young women or just the young men. We also have conference talks for just the priesthood. Now you can view them if you're not, corresponding to it. So if you're a female and you want to learn about the priesthood, what they're doing there, you can do that if you want to. But um, it's not like restricted or anything. But that's just kind of like how they do things sometimes. Um, but anyway, going back
Yeah.
to Mormon mind control, being a kid and teaching, I was only able to teach like a few classes because I started getting weirded out by how they wanted me to teach the kids, you know. But anyway, I find the interesting of the calling, the timing of the calling interesting, because like I said, they like to give people a job, so that way they feel important, they feel welcomed, and it makes them want to stay in the church, right? They feel like they have an obligation.
Now, can I
You know
ask
what I
a
mean?
yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, and a quick question too. You said you were a convert, but it was 13. Did your family attend the church? Did you go to like a random youth group event? How did you get
Um,
involved?
how did I get involved? The missionaries knocked on our door, and my mom let them in.
Okay.
And here's the funny thing, my dad was actually Mormon, but I did not know up until that, no, for a really long time. I did not know my dad was Mormon. I thought, my mom is actually Catholic, and that's why we never grew up Mormon, because my mom didn't like Mormons. Like she didn't hate them, but she didn't. I don't know. She's a little strange. Like she's really strange. It's hard for me, for anyone, for that matter, to understand why she does what she does. But that's for the most part, we were kind of I was kind of raised with a very, very, very basic watered down belief in God. Like I didn't know that the Old Testament and the New Testament made up the Bible. I didn't know what the Ten Commandments were. The only thing I knew was the guy with the boat and Jesus and Mary and Joseph, and like good people go to heaven and bad people go to hell. And that was the full extent of like my religious background, you know, growing up. I didn't know anything else. So like a lot of like Christianity or whatever Mormons call it, they call themselves Christian. I don't really consider it Christian, because if you see, because most of the what they project to the public that they call Christianity is like it's just a big fat lie, because the real beliefs of Mormonism come from their institute classes, from their institute manual, which, by the way, they do not teach the missionaries that. And in fact, after you graduate high school, you're old enough to serve a mission, fresh out of high school. So, in order to attend seminary, I mean, institute classes, you would have to skip serving your mission to go to institute. But most people, I kid you not, do not attend institute. I was in institute for a bit, but that was around the time where, like, after I had graduated and like things were getting really rough for me because the religion wasn't working out for me, and so I was going to institute. But I was so anxious, socially anxious, like I couldn't focus at all because of I was going through a lot of, being in a cult and stuff. And I didn't know I was in a cult at the time, but I was just having a big inner turmoil and struggle. Um, yeah. So then the missionaries, you know, I didn't, I kind of knew my dad was Mormon, like maybe like 2 years before, or something like that. But it was like a very like one time thing where like my older sister had told me that our dad was Mormon. I had no really idea what Mormon was, you know, and I didn't know that for a while. Like I had to find out from my sister that my dad was Mormon. But despite my dad being Mormon, he's been really inactive. So that's why I never been to a Mormon church. I don't know what Mormons believe at the time. I did hear some things about like polygamy or whatever, that they don't do it anymore. But like being a convert is an interesting story. But that's like if I start now, I won't be able to finish about the kids, the brainwashing for the kids. So let me finish that part
Sure.
first.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And real quick question just to help some of our listeners too for some of the inside terminology. Institute, real quick definition on that
Oh,
is
sorry. Okay, so basically, seminary is what I attended. Every high school student who's Mormon is like really super encouraged to attend seminary. Um, it's like a big thing. We even have like a ceremony for like graduation and things like that. My ward was small, so we only had about like 20 kids show up to seminary every morning. So seminary is like basically a religious class that the church has, and it actually has real credit in the real world. I think only in, well, I can't really say only in because I don't know, but I do know like for places like Utah,
like Brigham
uh,
Young University.
yeah, like Brigham
Yeah.
Young University,
Is it like a youth
they
group or is it
is it
different?
is it like a youth group? I guess because it's like only for the youth.
Okay.
Yeah, so like adults don't really attend like seminary. I never seen an adult try to do that before or anything like that. But like it's just basically religious classes. So it's about 4 years, and every year it's a different book that we study. So for me, I studied the Mormon book called Doctrine and Covenants. The next year it was I think it was Old Testament, then New Testament, and then finally the Book of Mormon. So like freshman, junior, sophomore, senior, like 4 years, and they have their own criteria for like how you graduate, you like your attendance, like you have some homework you need to do. So institute is like a step up from that, right?
Okay.
So this is really important that the things you learn in the public church is super different than the things you learn in seminary. What you learn in seminary is super different from what you learn in institute. But the real hardcore doctrine, the real beliefs are actually from institute. Now, they don't encourage institute a lot. The missionaries likely don't go to institute unless they're like maybe they're older and they've more experience and they probably have gone to institute, but for the most part the missionaries are really young and they have no idea of what institute is, or maybe they know it but they don't have any knowledge from it, right? So they are being missionaries, teaching people super watered down beliefs, making other people believe that they think they know Mormonism, but they really don't. So not even the missionaries know.
That's
I
very interesting. And I'll
I don't like that. Go ahead.
well, I was just saying, I'll get you because I know I was pulling you away for a quick definition, and we were going to get back to the brainwashing of kids.
Oh,
I
you're
just,
right.
I just wanted to say too, though, I've seen though what you're talking about because I love talking religion and spirituality. So when I see the missionaries down the street, I'm like, ooh, ooh, over here, But I've talked to them, and yeah, a lot of times the missionaries that I've spoken with, they don't seem to know much of the deeper doctrine. In fact, when I bring up Doctrine and Covenants and some of the stuff in there, they don't seem to know a lot of what's in there. In fact, a lot of times I have to kind of teach them a little bit more about
Yes.
Mormonism. But
Yes.
but okay, so speak to this brainwashing of kids. I want to get into that.
Okay. I only taught a few classes because this was around the time where I started to explore like other things. Like I think I was getting into learning about non-duality. Um, you know what I mean? And so I started to, I this was before I learned about cults, right? But I started to learn about non-duality, and I started to learn, like in the real world, how people are separated and divided. I I learned how ego likes to separate, divide things, likes to categorize things, like to label things, because you use it as a way to give your self identity. Because when you identify with the left, it's easier to judge the right because you separated yourself from the right. So why would you judge something that's you? You can only judge what you perceive to be not be you, but it's an illusion of the ego. And this is why we have people fighting in the real world with this versus that, girl versus boy, blah blah blah. You know what I mean? This politician, that politician, things like that. So good versus evil. There's also uh, you that that duality is what governs our whole world. We have to. It's a foundation for our whole human cognition and language is duality. we have to have opposites. That's how we understand when we talk about something. You know what I mean? Otherwise, if we didn't have anything to separate and divide stuff, if I were to say something, I would be talking about the whole entire universe and I couldn't get down to a specific thing. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
so one of the things in duality is that they have to have a good and an evil. Um, and when I was teaching the kids, I started to realize that they were instilling duality by teaching them Jesus is the good guy and Satan is the bad guy, kind of thing. Um, and that was a little interesting, for me to realize that, because we didn't really focus that much on Satan. And when I was, growing up, like, for those 5 years, we don't really talk about Satan that much, right? But there's like the general idea that like Satan is the bad guy, but we were kind of like more. It was kind of more dramatic. And when I say this is because, like, the first lesson I gave, we have like a manual for the primary, by the way. So there's actually an app called, I think it's called LDS Library, and you can download it. It's for free, and you can have access to all their manuals. You can have access to their seminary. You can have access to all their pamphlets and things like that. It literally is a library of like all the churches like stuff, so you can read their scriptures there if you want. um, you can look inside their manuals. You can read their institute manuals if you like. You can look at their seminary. You can look at all their doctrines there. You can even look at really, really old general conference talks, which, by the way, are super problematic. They have a lot of them are like, they have like racist stuff, sexist stuff, or like really like out of pocket, like weird stuff. And it's kind of weird because like those are really, really old conference talks, and the people in the church, like, they don't really read them. They don't really see anything's wrong with them because they're not relevant, because they're from, like, I don't know, like 1950 or something like that. But yeah, like if you go to read through those things, you actually find that there's some like really kind of weird stuff there that kind of makes you uncomfortable. Um, but anyway, like, I was taught in the manual to write "Get thee hence, Satan" on the board and then have the kids repeat it. And the kids were like really eager to say that. They were like, "Get thee hence, Satan." And I was like, I didn't even like finish telling them to repeat it. I was like, "Can you say?" And they just repeated it. Like, I was gonna say, "Can you say this, like the phrase?" And they just like instantly just said it. And that was like kind of weird to hear kids scream Satan, even though it's like "Get thee hence, Satan," because the idea was like, oh, Jesus was on the mountain and Satan tried to tempt Jesus or whatever. And that's what Jesus said to Satan. It was like, "Get thee hence, Satan." So I had the kids repeat that. That felt a little weird. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's just when it comes from kids, like saying Satan, and like that's like the first lesson you teach them. And it's just like, I'm already understanding that they're creating a good guy and a bad guy kind of deal.
And
Right?
it
Which
was
is,
get the hence, get the hind.
yeah, "Get thee hence."
Okay.
Hende. It's a phrase. That's what Jesus said to Satan when, I think when Jesus was fasting or whatever,
Yeah.
and like Satan tried to like tempt him or whatever. I can't really remember like what the whole point of that lesson was, other than to just instill duality in them. But the thing about that, like on a broader scale, is that you need duality to have identity. Cults want you to have identity, and they want you to judge the opposite. They also like to create like a scapegoat, or like somebody that you can hate, someone that you feel like you can judge, or at least someone to be afraid of, because that's the role of Satan. And this, in the way that they used it against me, was that they make you very kind of scared of him, because they tell you things like, okay, hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. But um,
Sure. Yeah.
another big thing that I noticed was that we have songs in the primary that are kind of creepy. Um, there's a song called "Follow the Prophet," and the phrase "Follow the Prophet" is repeated 54 times in the whole song. Follow the Prophet. Imagine singing that lyric 54 times in that song. That's brainwashing the kids
Yeah.
to
Wow.
be obedient to the church authority. It's like, follow the prophet. He knows the way. I don't really know exactly the whole lyrics, but it's a really catchy tune though, and it's very popular. Like everyone knows that song. And it's basically brainwashing 54 times. The same thing over and
Yeah.
over again. That's brainwashing the kids.
Yeah, using kind of
Uh,
like mnemonic devices and yeah.
Exactly. That's what they do in cults too. And that's another thing too, is that in cults they like to have a lot of singing, they like to have a lot of like hymns and stuff. And I get it because they kind of do make people feel good because they have nice lyrics. But a lot of the times they do that is because when you're singing, everyone's focused on singing, you're not thinking. They don't want you to think. So that way they have a lot of music, are singing and things like that because it distracts you. Unless you're not singing, maybe you can find a way to think. But like that's the whole point. And just it kind of looks awkward when you don't sing. Like I remember when I didn't want to sing. And like in the beginning, like I didn't really want to sing. And like some people asked me, like, why are you singing? Or like people would look at me like, hey, you're supposed to be singing, kind of thing. And like like even we would like in regular church, like our mission, not our mission president, I think our ward president or whatever, or stake president. Okay, so we have wards, right? So like 5 wards might make up a stake, right? So our stake president is the guy who like presides over all these wards. He's like a higher authority, higher than a bishop, right? And he would
Yeah.
like come up and like when he would give a talk, he would talk to us about how, hymns are like our way of like honoring God and things like that. And he would like tell us, to sing the hymns and things like that. Um, I don't really think people care too much about it, but like every once in a while they will bring it up, like just how important the hymns are and why you should be singing them, yada yada, things like that. Um, but yeah, those are like two things that I noticed. Another thing is that I don't like this is because kids are too young to decide if they want to become a member of the church. 7-year-olds can, apparently, according to the Mormon church, have the free will to choose the Mormon church to become baptized. They're 7 years old. They're 7. They don't know anything. Like they're 7. They're indoctrinated to like follow Jesus and like want to be like him and follow the prophet. They're also indoctrinated to give tithing to the church. Um, yes, they are. Like they'll have these little like exercises where like they'll give the kids candy. Let's say they'll give them like 10 M&Ms, and then they'll tell you, okay, one of those M&Ms goes to God. And that teaches them like to tithing and things like that. Kids are taught to pay tithing. Another thing that's also kind of weird is that that they teach kids that the testimony, like to have a testimony of our church being true, because Mormons really believe that they are the only true church upon the whole face of the earth. Even in the scripture, um, I forgot what it was called, but there's a scripture. I think I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think it's in Doctrine and Covenants. I forgot what the name of it was specifically, but it basically tells Joseph Smith's, apparently his story about how he was in the sacred grove and he saw God and Jesus tell him that all the other churches were, this is the real word, abominations, and that he was the guy that's going to start, the real church, right? Because this is around the time like the 1800s, where like everyone, was trying to create their own church and stuff like that. And actually, Joseph Smith, he used to be a Presbyterian, and he says when he had that experience that that he found out that it wasn't true. So basically, this like Mormons are like, super super, like they talk about it all the time of how they believe that their church is the true church. They have kids talk about it a lot. That's and so like testimony is like your what you know to be true, essentially. They get kids to go up there and bear their testimony that they don't even have yet because they're 7 years old. You know what I mean? And it's really just like scripted stuff. These kids don't know what they're getting into. They really don't. They're too young. They're
Yeah.
too young, and it looks bad. It looks bad because there's some people where I've heard, on YouTube or whatever, talking about this stuff, where like some kids felt pressured by their parents to get baptized, and that's why they did it. And for some reason, I don't know why, but Mormons think that 7-year-olds are old enough. You don't know if that 7-year-old is gonna grow up to be gay. You don't know if that 7-year-old is gonna, be trans or LGBTQ. And by the time, they grow up and they're super indoctrinated, they don't know who they are yet because they're 7. And then that's going to get them into big trouble because they're hugely indoctrinated. And then, like, what do you do with yourself? Because you've been taught to judge these things growing up, but then what do you do when you become the very thing that you judge? It's impossible to love yourself. It's impossible to feel like you belong in the Mormon church. And that's what's like really, it's kind of sad. Like, most people don't think about that.
Kind of like,
You know?
that kind of tribalism that pops up. And I think it's interesting. Personally, I'm really thankful that the kind of evangelical, non-denominational Christian church that I grew up in, I have a much different take on religion now than that church I grew up in. But I do love, and I do account some of my freedom of thought now to my pastor growing up used to say, don't take my word for it. Go home and read this stuff yourself. And I remember being like a young teenager, 13, 14, and accepting that challenge and going home and doing my own study instead of just taking his word for it. And I think that kind of paved the way for me to get to where I am today. But it does seem like that, that's quite the difference as opposed to follow the prophet 52 times.
Yeah, you could like find it on YouTube. Like, it's a really catchy tune. Like,
yeah,
I never liked like teaching the kids because like 6 or 7-year-olds are hard to teach. It's hard to get them to sit down. Oh yeah, that reminds me. Okay, so like when I was talking about, they indoctrinate kids to bear their testimony, we get taught that in order to have a testimony of the church being true, you have to say that it's true, and then eventually you'll have your testimony of the church being true, which is basically mind control. You repeat anything enough, it programs your mind to believe it's true. So we're already indoctrinating kids by getting them to bear their testimony of something they don't really believe, but that is what we're called. It's called the testimony is in the bearing of it, and like they'll have a little activity and they'll give them like gummy bears or something like that.
And so what led to your kind of escape? What led to your kind of tell me a little bit how you got out from underneath all this.
Okay, well, let me just say one more thing and then I'll get to that.
Sure.
There was another moment that really freaked me out because there was this really good kid, and I can tell he was super, super indoctrinated. There was another kid that was misbehaving, and like, so like the goody two kid tells the other kid, "You need to behave because God is watching," and he points to a picture of Jesus on the wall. That kid is so indoctrinated that he was taught to feel judgment from God, that God is always watching him, that he feels the need to manipulate other people's behavior by telling them the same thing. That probably meant that his parents was like trying to control behavior, like God is watching him. So he was doing that to like the kid that was misbehaving, and that kind of freaked me out a bit.
Yeah, and I think you see that in a lot of different religions too, with kind of that morality that gets handed out through the form of like commandments, or like obey the commandments or face judgment and punishment. And
exactly.
And that's quite a common format and template for a lot of religions.
It is actually, morality. Okay, don't really ask me what paradigm is, but it's kind of important to know. But morality is a paradigm. And that's something you would have to look into if you're really interested in understanding how morality is a paradigm. But basically, morality it kind of makes a gateway to like the ego and like the judgment and things like that. And that morality can actually be used against you when you take it to that extreme or seriously, because people think morality is like such a good thing, and granted it is. But like people don't understand that there's like ego trap within morality that is actually holding them back. There's like a video I can send you about it.
Yeah, I would actually be very interested if you could maybe after the interview link me to that interview, and then I can put it in the comments for other people to watch as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can. I already know where to search it up, but how I got Mormonism anyway. That's how I got. So this was a very, very slow and painful process. This leads up to me not being worthy in the Mormon church. And that's how that story leads into that story. All right.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
When the first year being Mormon, it was amazing, but that was because I was worthy. That was because I was too young to really do anything bad, and I was too young and too ego filled, and I didn't really have a good childhood. I was like bullied a lot, like always lonely. Didn't have a lot of friends. Things like that. And it like really hurt like my sense of like my self love and like my self worth and my self esteem and my confidence. And so like when you're in a cult, they give you those things to you. You know, they're like, here, this is what you are, this is what you want to be, this is your life path. But the thing is that when you are living your life to your authentic self, you decide that for yourself. But a cult, they just give it to you. You don't have to do any work. It's yours. You know what I mean? Um, and it's like it's very, tempting for people who do not have a good sense of their authentic self, or a healthy sense of self. You know, because like they give you a sense of self, but they have to do that, otherwise you wouldn't stay in the cult, because the cult relies solely on ego. Without ego there can't be any cult. That's the true, because duality is an illusion of the ego. Separation, division is illusion of the ego. So they instill duality because that is the foundation to ego, is duality. That's like our whole world is run with that. And because most people really believe in separation and division, it's hard for people to believe in like oneness. You know what I mean? Um, and so like it's it's easier for people to understand that, you know. Um, but anyway, that's like the very foundation to like cults is duality, is ego. There was another thing I was gonna say, but I I forgot about that. But yeah. Anyway, I kind of forgot.
That's all right.
But
I've got you on the spot here. You're doing all the talking, but
yeah, I know. Um, oh yeah, like everything was good, but that was because I was high off of my own identity, being a religious person. You know, so like sometimes, like a lot of times, even in spirituality, this happens where like their ego will trick them into having another identity. But the whole point, well, at least in how I understand spirituality, based on myself, is that you try to lose the ego, like integrate like the lessons from it. You know what I mean? But like some people, it's like they move from one ego identity to another ego identity, which just puts them back in the same position. And that's another trick that our ego does, right? So I was basically high off on my own ego. I was like really proud of myself, like I felt really special. But of course, how that got into how that everything just kind of leads to another thing. It's like hard to really say it, because like if I say one thing, it's like all these questions lead to like another thing that happened in the past. But oh my god, like I'm not sure where to start here. But like basically, I
sure.
loved it up until I didn't love it. um, and so like this was around the time I was like super super sheltered. Like when you don't have any friends, like you don't learn about the outside world, you don't learn about how other people live. Like I never been to like other people's houses and things like that. And so um like there was a lot I didn't know, right? So in Mormonism we have this thing like called law of chastity, things like that. Things like don't have sex before you're married, and like they talk about things like you can't date till you're 16. That's a Mormon rule, that you can only date until you're 16, and they really only encourage like group dating, and things like that. I still kind of don't understand it a little bit, even now. It's but they encourage like to date a lot and date a lot of people, and things like that. They also like have their rules, like you can't be alone with a boy, kind of thing. I remember I was in seminary, and like there was this couple, about high school age, and like we're learning seminary in somebody's home. It's hosted at somebody's home this year, right? And like we were like all in the kitchen because we were having breakfast at seminary, and I remember the wife got mad that uh two people were alone in like the teach room. Like we were teach them where like the whiteboard is and where the desks are and stuff like that. And I felt like that would have like, what's the word? I guess like, I don't know, critical, you know? And the reason why they don't like that is because they don't want you to like sin, or they don't want you to like kiss or like have sex or whatever the heck. But like we're literally not like we're only like 10 feet away from them, like they're not going to do anything, you know. And I kind of felt like why'd she chastise them when like they're not going to do anything, you know what I mean? And I don't know, it's just weird. um
Yeah, I understand. Like
but
a
like I didn't,
religious rule.
yeah, yeah. So like I didn't understand like what like masturbation was, obviously. I didn't know. I was really young. I didn't know. Like I feel like I was late to the party in that regard, because I actually thought for like a while that I was asexual because I didn't understand like sexual like arousal. I didn't understand like what those feelings were like. But the purity culture and everything kind of just scared me a lot being young, because like, you know, the whole modesty thing, it kind of made me scared of guys, or a little bit like judgmental of them. Not that I hated them or anything. Like if I had any kind of friend, like I have more guy friends than girlfriends in like my whole life, you know what I mean? But like it made me kind of think like everyone's like a pervert, and like and it kind of like makes me feel like I'm some kind of like sexual object that I have to like cover up or whatever. But like it's just it's a little weird, you know, for me, because like it made me really uncomfortable, because like I'm 13, like I'm growing into like a more mature body, and I'm feeling like uncomfortable because like I don't want anyone looking at me, you know, especially because like I'm kind of shy at the time, you know, I was like introverted. I don't want anyone looking at me, you know. But like it would kind of make me think like, are these, because the way that I was taught was like when a man is like to a certain point and he has lust for somebody, that he can't control himself, and like you're basically asking like to be raped or whatever or something like that, you know. I was also taught like, because like in Mormonism, like you don't show your shoulders, your bare back, like your pants or whatever, you know, your shorts had to be a certain length, things like that. You know what I mean? And
Yeah, yeah,
and
I'm following you.
and like it always made me subconsciously like uncomfortable whenever like the bishop would have a pool party, you know, or and like there's a bunch of guys, or like when I went to youth camp for girls, there were some guys there, you know. And like that was always in the back of my mind. I never said anything, but it was just one of those things where it's like I was taught to see that guys look at girls this way.
Mm,
And I think that kind of like made me look at myself that way, and it made me not like myself, and it made me like a little bit afraid of other people. And like, and not just like, you know, peers my age, but like even the older men, even men who were married, who had kids. Like I felt like, because that's how I was taught, like, you know, these boys, they grow up, you know, there is no like, you know, like there's no, like it doesn't stop, you know.
yeah,
I wasn't, you know what I mean? So it just makes me think like not only do like maybe boys my age, but like the adults too, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And I didn't really like talk about it that much, but like, and that goes down to like my creepy bishop, which I'll go into that. But like I didn't know like what masturbation was. It took me a long time to figure out what that was. And then when I figured that out, I was like really 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 scared, because I knew at the time, like I made the connection, like, wait a second, like I'm not allowed to do this. This is bad. I'm sinning, you know? And I
mm,
thought I would never do anything bad, you know, because I had my own ego about myself, that like I was like always good, like I always went to church, I was always going to the lessons, like I was always participating, and I was genuinely a really good, kind-hearted person. And I really, you know, wanted to, please God, and like do good things in the world, and like be a light to the world, and you know, things like that. Like I really had really good intentions, but they made me feel like shit for something I shouldn't feel like shit for. And then
mm,
not only that, I was abused, sexually abused. um but like at the time, like when I knew this was going on, you know, I was crying and crying. And I was like trying to figure out, oh my God, how am I going to get out of this? You know, and I was like remembering, like, you know, there's like repentance, you know, there's like the atonement, you know, and like things like that. But I was really scared to even talk about this stuff, because the thing is that because of the whole purity culture, it makes you super, super prude.
mm.
And this is what kept me from speaking up for the longest time, because I was so embarrassed of myself, super embarrassed of. I didn't even want to tell anybody, you
So you
know.
didn't feel
And
like
then
you could open up and get help.
exactly,
Yeah,
and eventually I did, but not because like I did want to get help, but there was too much of the judgment. It's super prudish in the church. Like even the adults, whenever they have the adult classes, you know, like even
yeah,
the adults are prudish, and they have kids, and they had sex, and like we can't even like talk about like it in a way where like everyone's just cried in the room. Like you know what I mean? It's just
Yeah.
kind of like you're not owning yourself. You're not owning like the sexual aspects of yourself. We're judging it. That's why it's taboo, because in order for things to be taboo, there has to be judgment. And where there is judgment, there is no unconditional love and there is no gratitude. And you're denying aspects of yourself, which gives you a shadow, your shadow self. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's has to more to do with like I don't know if you know who Carl Jung is. He's like a philosopher. He's like his teachings is like the very foundation to like my spiritual work. And he talks about like how our ego gives us this shadow self where it's like things we don't like about ourselves, things that we hate or judge in ourselves and things like that, and like how that controls us, how does that shape our psychology and things like that. So it's like his philosophy is like the very foundation to my spiritual work, which is what I call shadow work. And now that's kind of like a weird name, but it's basically, Carl Jung's philosophy about like facing your fears, losing your ego, not being afraid what other people thinks, things like that. I didn't know at the time that he was a philosopher that talked about this stuff, because I was introduced to it in another way, in a spiritual way. I was not, but I made the connection eventually, like, oh, this is exactly what I do in spiritual work, right?
Do you know
But yeah,
what?
go ahead.
Do you know what he's connected to? Whether it's Eastern philosophy or existentialism, or do you know kind of what his background is? You don't have to, but
No, I
no, it's all good.
don't. I
I'll do
wish
some
I did.
research on him too. He sounds really interesting.
He's amazing. He's amazing. Like the things that he teaches like really helps me get like step more into my authentic self and not my ego self. You know what I mean? It's amazing. It's super cool.
Yeah,
But
he sounds like a good listen.
yeah. Um, and anyway, like I had this shadow self that I hated myself for, and like because of the judgment surrounding sexual purity, anything like sexual, that was something I kind of judged the most in a way, because I felt like, oh, I was never going to do anything like that. But of course, I didn't know what I was doing, so like it's not like I consciously knew, because I wasn't taught that. They didn't tell me that. And like even like in the Mormon church, like they're so prudish. Like I was in institute one time, and like one of the topics was like sexual purity, and like our teacher, who was I think he was I think he used to be the stake president, but I think he just became like an institute teacher. But I remember one time he said the word masturbation when he was like talking about it, and he apologized for saying it. Just
Mm,
like in front of everyone, like he's like, sorry. You know what I mean? Like I'm
yeah.
just like, okay, like, but like that's what it is, like, you know what I mean? So it's just like this dude is like he's even uncomfortable like saying, like talking about it. I'm just like, this is like kind of like, this just makes things worse than it already is. You know what I mean? And it doesn't have to be that way. It's just when there's this judgment around that, you can't speak about things freely, and people can't get help when people feel like they're going to be judged,
Yeah,
you know?
it creates a sense of repression.
Exactly. And so like I was dealing with this. I hated myself for this, and like I would try to look for like the church's like pamphlets or whatever for like regarding the topic of sexual purity and things like that. And everything I read just made me feel like 20 times worse.
Mm,
I remember we have this pamphlet called "For the Strength of Youth," and they give this to all the youth. And there's a chapter on like things like friends, entertainment, the way you dress, like language, things like that. And then one of the topics is like sexual purity, among other stuff. And like we have a scripture in Mormonism where this prophet said that sexual sin was second to killing somebody. And that was in our
wow.
Strength of Youth pamphlet. So how do you think I felt when I read that?
Yeah, like a murderer probably.
Yes, pretty
Yeah.
much. Yeah, I felt like super, super bad. And I don't even know why they put that in there.
Yeah.
Because, but I never really read the whole pamphlet like through and through. So like I'm trying to scrabble, trying to gather resources to help myself, but like all the resources just make me feel worse.
Mm,
I and that's like, you know they have worse resources, and I'm glad I wasn't exposed to those. There's actually a YouTube channel called Mormon Stories Podcast where they talk about all that kinds of stuff, and it's like way more wild than my story. It gets really crazy. But yeah, Mormon Stories Podcast is, I've been watching their YouTube channel, every so often. and I learn a lot about like cults and like mind control and other people's stories. And like I put together the pieces and I start to realize, wait a second, like this happened to me, or I can relate to that, or this, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, what got me to repent was not because I really like I did want to get better, but like everything they gave me just made me feel worse, right? And so
Yeah.
I went to this like this kind of seminar thing for the Mormon youth, right? And I forgot what it was called. I don't know. Maybe it was called youth conference, or was it stake conference, or something like that. It was something for the youth, and they scared me into repenting because they told me something that really stuck with me and that made me really scared. And this is how they utilize Satan, make me afraid of Satan. Basically, we're in this class. They get a whole bunch of Mormon teachers to teach the youth, and it's just class after class after class. Like it's basically like indoctrination after indoctrination. It's like I think it's like 3 hours or so.
Wow.
And I think it lasts for like 2 days. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we did have things like, we had food to eat or like sports or whatever, but like I didn't really like know any better. They didn't have any friends. I just kind of feel left out and whatever. Um, but like there's this teacher who was talking about sin. And this was kind of weird because in our whole like seminar thing, we were heavily focused on repentance and sin and things like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was like, it made me really uncomfortable because I know I'm a sinner. I'm
Yeah.
actually a sinner. Like, I'm really uncomfortable now. Like, hearing all this stuff. And like, I'm like, oh man, like,
Yeah.
anyway, he was talking about how like the frog. Have you ever heard this analogy of like if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll jump out, but if you put a frog in like warm water, heat up the temperature little by little until it starts to boil, the frog will still stay in there because it does not recognize the temperature change because it's very gradual.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
interesting. I've not heard that before, but it makes sense.
Okay, but this is basically what they were used to describe sin and Satan. That Satan likes to tempt you of little things, and then before you know it, you get worse and worse, and you're in boiling water, right? So, like, how do you think that made me feel? I was afraid I was going to become some kind of sexual deviant or something like that. Like, I was scared because I'm like, well, shit, like if I'm doing this now, I can't imagine what I'd be doing later. I don't want to be that person.
Yeah. Where
You
will
know what
you
I
be in
mean?
10 years? Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And I was really scared, like, oh my God, what's gonna happen to me? Like, am I gonna become this worse and worse person? Like, am I gonna be some kind of weird, like, sexual deviant? Like, is it just gonna control my whole life? Like, they scared me, by telling me this thing. And of course they use the word Satan and things like that. So of course when you hear like Satan, you think I gotta protect myself. I can't
Yeah.
have any temptation, you know what I mean? And so like it just see this is what they do, is that like they this is how I understand it in spirituality now. Whatever you judge in others, or whatever you judge, period, is what you judge in yourself. Judgment is what creates karma. So just as I was proud of myself, I was egotistical, I felt, really good about myself, the higher you are, the harder you fall, so to
Yeah.
speak, you know?
Yeah.
So like, for me, how do I love myself when I become the very thing that I judge the most? Because it made me really prude. And, and it's just basically, I was just denying aspects of myself, being a human being, you know? And I shouldn't feel bad for things that are normal and things like that. And that's the thing, is like the church, they just tell you not to do these things. They don't actually tell you like real solutions. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they just tell you not to do it. But that's the thing, because they're set up in an ego based cult, because the ego loves to judge. By instilling judgment, they are getting people to create karma for themselves, so that way it's like a loop where it's like, okay, you learn these doctrines, you learn to judge based on these doctrines, you get your karma, you judge yourself, and now you're broken, you're messed up, you need Jesus, you need to repent. And despite the fact that we've taught you to get into this cycle in the first place, you need us. this institution, this establishment in order for you to get better, when in fact they were the very thing that got you in that problem to begin with.
Yeah, it
Right?
manufactures the problem so that
Exactly.
they can contain or control the solution.
Exactly what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
So then I get really scared. I feel really guilty. I don't know, I'm like, okay, I have to do this, right? But I couldn't talk to my bishop about this, talk to him about it. Like, so this is what I did was like, we have these youth group for like young women, right? So, so young women, I forgot like the age, but it's like basically like teenager, preteen kind of. And we have these things in Mormonism called patriarchal blessings. Don't ask me why it's called patriarchal blessings. That's what they're called. I don't know why. It's kind of weird. But basically, you have to take a worthiness interview, right? Uh, I already know how the worthiness interview works. I know what the 10 questions are, right? One of the questions is asking about your sexual purity. Kids as young as 13 years old can be asked about that. That's kind of messed up because they're alone in a room with a dude who's a bishop who's like probably married, probably has kids, and this older guy, is asking someone who is like obviously underage about their sexual purity. You know what I mean? And that's kind of creepy.
Yeah,
I don't know why. I don't know why it's up loud.
that's a huge red
Uh,
flag
yes,
in a lot of ways.
exactly right. Um, and um, anyway, so I knew I wasn't worthy to receive the blessing. I already knew that, right? But I couldn't just set up an appointment with my bishop and just talk about it. I was really, really shy about it. So I set up an appointment to get my patriarchal blessing, right? So because in Young Women, we were having a lesson about our patriarchal blessings and things like that. And most of my peers already got theirs because they're really young and they probably, don't have time to sin, or they're too innocent or whatever the heck. I mean, I was too, but you know, um, you know what I mean? So like I never
Yes.
got
Yeah.
mine, and I kind of feel like I didn't necessarily feel pressured, but I was kind of thinking about like my patriarchal blessing. So the thing about your patriarchal blessing, if my memory serves me correct, you you get your I think you get your spiritual name. I'm not sure if that's in like cuz you hold on. I could be wrong about this, but I think you get your spiritual name and you get the tribe of Israel that you're from. And then basically this guy called the patriarch, I know it's kind of weird, but he's called the patriarch. Like he has this ordained special gift from God that God speaks through him, and he puts his hands on your head, and basically God is telling you through him what he wants you to know about yourself, your life, what to look out for, and things like that. They basically make up shit.
Like almost like they're acting
Like a
like a
fortune teller.
prophecy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um they basically make up shit and things like that. And it actually damages a lot of people because people actually think this is God, and they follow like the advice on the thing, on their patriarchal blessing, and it like ruins them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, but anyway, like I was kind of thinking to myself, like, oh, I wonder, what God would say about me or whatever. And so like I kind of got a text message from my leader, and she was like, hey, have you gotten your patriarchal blessing list? I was like, no. And she's like, oh, maybe this is a prompting that maybe you should go get one. And I was like, okay, whatever. So I set up an appointment to get my blessing. He asked me the questions. One of the last, 3 or 4 questions was regarding my sexual purity. I completely broke down and cried. I couldn't even look him in the face because I was that embarrassed. And I think I was like 15 at the time. I think I was like a sophomore. I'm not sure. Um, and I told him I didn't know what I was doing in the beginning. And it was it was just really awkward, because like our bishop, like he was kind of a friend of our family before he was a bishop, so I knew him before he was called a bishop, and he knew our family, he was very welcoming and really nice to our family.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until like after what happened that I realized the subtle, creepy undertones uh, he would always give our family like big ass pies, and like he even gave like our family like a mountain of candy like one time. You know what I mean? Like it was just like a box, and like it's like a little, like the boxes get smaller, but they're all stacked on each other. And like when you open the box, it's like candy or like
Yeah.
treats or whatever. He would take my family and I out, my sisters and I, to get frozen yogurt. And I thought he was a genuinely good guy. And if you ask anyone, everyone would say he's nice. He would have pool parties at his house. He like installed like a pool at his house, things like that. He would invite everyone, like a going back to school party or like end of the year party or whatever. He would just have, like parties, and like the whole ward's invited. Like there's lots of food and, things like that.
Yeah.
And like everyone's like having a good time and stuff. But like he started asking me questions. But by the way, like the thing about Mormon bishops is that they know way too much than they should, and they overstep boundaries. But the thing of Mormonism is like when you go into Mormonism, the boundaries are already overstepped, so you don't even know what healthy boundaries are at this point, right? And of course, I was taught, because I believed in the church 100%, right? So I
Yeah.
believed that everybody who was in a position of authority was called of God, not called of man. And that, since this is the true church upon the whole face of the earth, that this is not man's church, that this is Jesus's church, that every single way that the church is ran, down from the youth groups to the activities to like the way that, the hours of the way it's scheduled, like, everything, every detail, even like the minute details, that was the way Christ would have wanted it. I know that's super indoctrinated, but that's how I thought, at the time. So I really trust him. And I was taught to trust our bishop. Whenever, when we ever have like a sacrament meeting, we have some people talk, just like random people in our ward, and the bishop will choose who and like what topic or whatever. And like you can change your topic if you want, but like they generally try to have a theme nowadays. And like I was kind of taught like, oh, don't be afraid of repentance, it's a beautiful thing, it makes you better, it strengthens your faith in Christ, and yada yada, things like that. And I know I wanted to have that, and I was willing to see that, well, maybe this isn't such a terrible thing, maybe this could actually bring me closer to God.
Yeah.
And maybe I shouldn't be afraid. And like I was willing to like grin and bear it, that if I were to come out victorious and become closer to Christ and things like that, I felt like that would be amazing for me, and that would help other people who were struggling too,
Yeah.
because I could be able to tell them my story.
A
That did
testimony.
not happen at all. This did not happen. It was the complete opposite. It was a disaster. It was terrible, and I couldn't talk to anyone about this. The bishop, he knew that I was depressed. He knew I was stressed out. He knew I was anxious. He knew about my family's divorce. He knew that all of my siblings and I had a huge problem with our mom. The thing in Mormonism is that, like, if you get sealed in the temple, you can be sealed in heaven for eternity, right?
Yeah.
But since my mom divorced my dad, and they never, because like I said, my mom wasn't Mormon, but because now she divorced my dad, not too long after we started going to church as a family, me and my dad were the only ones who really stuck to it. But like, that felt like she robbed me of the opportunity to be with my family together in heaven, and I hated her for it. I thought she was under the influence of Satan. It was really sad for me, because I really believed this was the true church. And like, I have to deal with the fact that I think I'm like 14 or 13 years old. I had to deal with my family's divorce, and now the religion just makes it 20 times worse.
It compounds it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I remember like crying to God, and praying to God, like that my mom would change her mind and stuff. But I was taught like about free will, and God gives people free will and things like that. And like I just thought, like I just felt bad, about
Yeah.
it all. And it was really hard for me,
Yeah.
especially because of the religious aspect that just compounded and made it way worse.
Yeah.
And I had a really hard time with my mom. I didn't want to look at her, didn't want to hold her hand. I didn't want to sit next to her. I didn't want to be in the same car ride as her. I didn't even want her taking me to seminary, because I really, really didn't like her, and it was really bad.
Yeah.
And that was because of the religion. I don't think I would have acted like that,
Yeah.
And like, of course, my dad was really emotional about it too, because my dad, this is his second time getting married. His first wife divorced him. He had a kid with his first wife, divorced him, and like this is his second divorce, and that's like really sad,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And he's like already like old and stuff like that. I think they've been married for like 18 years or so.
Wow.
And yeah, but like the bishop was too involved in our family matters, because our family's a mess, uh, not to, not to like overstep too much, because, it's a little weird, but like our bishop knew about our family and especially about the bad stuff that was happening in our family.
Yeah.
Uh, and I felt like because he knew how vulnerable I was and he knew I was in such a dark and low place, I felt like he saw me as a target,
Yeah. You felt preyed upon.
especially because he was kind of like too nice to our family. You know what I mean? Like kind of like insinuates like a little weirdness there, like something's not right. Especially this guy, he always had candy in his office. Always had candy. And he was rich, he was an eye doctor, you know. And
Yeah.
like, when I was teaching primary, like after primary ends, all the kids run to his office to grab candy. And they would like there was no limit to how much candy they would have. People would just grab candy, and he would always have candy. He would have juice, candy, and things like that. He would like have like a whole big bowl of it, and
Yeah.
like all the kids run to his office. This guy, he has kids of his own. I met his kids. I met his wife. I feel bad for his kids and wife because they don't know what happened to me. And I don't even know if the wife, sometimes you don't know if like the wife is just as crazy as he is. Like you don't know. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Or like in on it. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And it's just kind of like weird, but like he was asking me like I asked him like because when I confessed, I was like, "Are you gonna tell my parents?" He said, "No, it's completely private." Not even my parents knew about this issue. I was too embarrassed to tell my parents, and I wasn't close to my mom. And I feel like it's kind of weird to talk to your dad about sexual purity. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
something you maybe talk to your mom a bit, but I really didn't like my mom, and I was like really judgmental of myself, and I felt like I said I couldn't even look him in the eye like when I was talking about it because that's how prude I was, and that's how much I hated. That's how much shame I felt. All I
Yeah.
felt was guilt, shame, and embarrassment. Nothing else. I didn't feel no God's love. I didn't feel no Jesus love. And here's the thing, if you do not love yourself, it doesn't matter who loves you. That's why, but people who don't appreciate themselves, when someone gives you a compliment and you don't appreciate yourself, you have a hard time taking that compliment,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, like, so anyway, like I was doing this, and like the bishop was telling me things like, God is proud of you, and like, it's it's part of life. Everyone has to go through this stage. Everyone has to repent. No one is perfect. God doesn't require us to be perfect. And Jesus loves you no matter what. And things like that. And then he had this idea that every Sunday after sacrament meeting, when everyone goes to their classes, I would talk to him basically about my masturbation habits. And he wanted to know the time of day and the day of the week I was doing that every Sunday. Why did he need those
Yeah.
details? And when I actually talked to somebody, because I was kind of like in like a spiritual community, there was like this older, woman that I really feel comfortable talking to,
Yeah.
because she's so open-minded, and she talks about things that not a lot of people talk about, but they need to be said. And
Yeah.
it really inspires me, like how much wisdom she has, and how she can like actually talk about these things, and
Was she
it's
Mormon?
beautiful for me to see that. It's beautiful because I've never seen that before.
And was
Or
she
someone, huh?
was she Mormon as well? Was she part of the
Oh
church or?
no, she was
Okay.
not part of the church. She was part of the spiritual community.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and I, and like I was trying to do like my shadow work, trying to improve myself workout, but it would always bother me that the things that happened there between the bishop and I would always come back to my head, and it would bother me. And I was like, well, you know what? This is my shadow. I gotta face it. I gotta tell somebody.
Yeah.
And I decided to confide in her, and then she told me that basically he was getting off to my confessions. And the reason why he wanted to know the time of day and the day of week, so that way he can schedule it around the same time I do, because he was like visualizing that we were doing it together or something like that. That's why he wanted to know the time of day and the day of the week.
Yeah.
That's not important details. Why did he need he every Sunday?
Yeah.
I would tell him
Yeah.
every Sunday, and
It
I
also
thought
seems
he
like he
was
was
trying to make me.
creating, he was building an environment where he could further the discussion, is what it
Yes,
also sounds like to me.
exactly. And because he knew I wasn't telling my parents about it, because he
Mm-hmm.
knew how I felt about it.
Mm-hmm.
He knew I wasn't close to my mom. I was going through a rough time. He knew that everyone in after sacrament meeting was going to the classes. No one would know where I was. You know, uh,
Yeah.
I
Yeah. And
was talking to
he
him.
was building that relationship further, creating a sense of openness, but only between you and him. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really sick. It's really sick, and I it was really embarrassing. It's super embarrassing. That's all I felt was guilt, shame, and embarrassment. And I eventually, I think that went on for maybe like a few months or so, and I realized I wasn't getting better. And then he would try to tell me, he would try to give me advice, like things like, don't be alone. You know, don't like don't be alone. So like I would like go to youth activities or things that I didn't even care about or I was too mature to really participate in. But the only reason why I went was because I was afraid of what I was gonna do to myself if I didn't. He told me like turn off your phone, turn off the internet, put blocks, like don't look at porn or whatever the heck, like, things like really like surface level advice that doesn't really help. Like how am I never not supposed to be alone? Like everyone has to be like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like and like things like you need to go to sleep at night, but I have insomnia.
Yeah.
Like I can't sleep because of all the fucking shit from the cult and
Mm.
and that like I was like my life is like not fun right now, and it's never been fun. And I've had insomnia since I was like really young because I didn't realize it at the time, but it was because of my anxiety. I had anxiety before I even knew how to spell it or how to say it,
Yeah. Well, it's
because like I was
also,
getting, yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say it also like creates it's like someone once said, don't think about an elephant, don't think about their
Exactly.
big and their long trunk and their great,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You tell people not to think about it, that makes them think about it.
yeah.
It's a psychology thing, and anyway, like this was going on for like several months, and like his advice wasn't working. He would tell me things like, oh, if like you're horny, just read the scriptures or whatever, but that didn't fucking work. I would feel bad. I would pray. I would do my absolute darnest to feel better, but I didn't realize this at the time, because it wasn't until I got into psychology is that the more, like, in order to change, you have to accept yourself. Was I accepting myself through my process of repentance? Hell no. So of course it kept happening. The more I was talking about, the more I was ashamed of it, the more I was guilted, the more my shadow self I couldn't love my shadow self, the more it was happening, the more I tried to repress it, suppress it, and the more I was obviously going through sexual abuse. It only comes with greater force. What you resist persists, so accept what is, right? But I was nowhere near accepting myself, and his advice wasn't the real solution to my problem. My problem was that I didn't love myself. My problem was that I judged myself. My problem was that I didn't feel worthy. My problem was is that the time I needed God the most, I was denied my temple recommend because I couldn't go to the temple. I was denied my patriarchal blessing and I couldn't serve my mission. The time I need God the most, I'm denied because I'm not worthy.
Yeah. You're faced with judgment instead of acceptance and love. And yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And I would remember, like, I would pray to God. I'm just like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm trying my best and I can't get close to you because I'm not allowed to get close to you, but I feel like I need you more than ever, but I'm not allowed to, you know, experience you more and things like that. And I think I
Mm.
think this also happens in Mormonism. And this is another like social pressure thing that they do is like when you're repenting, I think afterwards, and I could be wrong about this, like you don't take the sacrament um after you confess. I think one time, right? And then after you can start taking it again. But the thing is everyone watches each other take the sacrament because we had to pass the bread and the water.
Mm-hmm.
It looks weird when you don't take the sacrament.
Yeah. It tells
And like it
everyone
makes
something's up, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think I can't remember what I did. I think either I hid in the restroom, which I think is probably what I did,
Mm.
or I just didn't go to church that Sunday or whatever.
Mm.
And I remember one time, you know, well, anyway, but but yeah, like it's like really embarrassing, and
Yeah.
it's just, it just not made me like myself even more. So like I'm saying, like it just created more ego. It created me hating myself. And the more I hated myself, the less I could accept myself. And that means the less I had a chance of actually changing who I was.
Yeah. So how did you eventually break free of all that?
How did I break free? I stopped going because I gave up on myself.
Mm. Yeah.
Because I thought there was nothing that could help me,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
And I would just go outside and like cry because if I wasn't going to church, I wasn't taking the sacrament. I was taught that the sacrament, it strengthens, it blesses, and it cleanses you, it heals you,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
because I'm afraid of Satan trying to tempt me with more sin, I feel like I'm super vulnerable. So like if I go to church, I feel like shit. If I don't go to church, I feel like shit. And now I'm scared of Satan. And I feel like I'm not protected. So that's like it makes me like feel like, well, I have to go back to church. But if I go back to church, I feel terrible. But if I don't, I feel terrible because I'm not keeping the Sabbath day holy. I'm breaking a commandment when I don't go to church. That's one of
Mm.
the 10 commandments. Keep the Sabbath day holy. You take the sacrament, you go to church. So here I am, I'm actually technically committing more sin. I am more vulnerable to Satan. And I don't even know what to do with myself at this point because no matter what I do, I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't, you know?
Mm.
So like I would just go outside, and I would just like pray to God and tell God, you know what, I'm tried. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Maybe, and this was around the time because my social anxiety was so bad, because this is around the time like I'm graduating, of pressure for me to become a person and to have my life figure out and things like that. And I never had any of that, done. I was never comfortable with myself. And in so many ways, I didn't love myself. I was like bullied a lot, didn't have any self-love, any self-esteem, any self-compassion, like any self-worth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like all those things on the inside that you need to have a will to live. I did not have that. You know
Mm.
what I mean? So I was just super, super depressed, even more depressed than I already was,
Yeah.
super stressed out because I feel like I'm like worthless, and I'm like, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
and and things like that. So I would just basically cry to God, and sometimes I would just go on like my whole body would just be flat on the floor or on the grass on the dirt because that's how bad I felt, and I wouldn't I wouldn't even be on my knees. I'd be on the freaking floor facing
Yeah.
the ground. My nose is touching the ground, because that's how I felt, and I would like
Mm.
pray and like talk to God, like, I'm doing my best. This is weird. I didn't know at the time I was being sexually abused. I didn't know at the time I was in a cult.
Mm.
All I knew was that if I stayed there, I felt bad, but also because I hated myself so much and I really felt ostracized by the whole world. I became agoraphobic, which
Mm.
meant that I didn't want to leave my house. I was
Yeah.
scared to leave my house. I didn't love myself. I didn't want people to even see me. You know what I mean?
Mm.
I didn't have any self expression. I was
Yeah.
afraid, and it's hard to live life like that. So I just basically be staying at home and like watching Netflix because depression loves TV, it loves distraction and things like that. But of course, like I would hate being distracted because deep down I know, there's more. I can't live like this. And it would bother me even more. And I would just basically like crying all the time. Like, I kid you not, like when I was going through that whole repentance process, not
Mm.
a week goes by where I didn't cry
Yeah.
because I really felt that bad. You know what I mean? And here's the thing, it's like when you put conditions on your self love or your self worth, you're never going to be satisfied because putting conditions on things like that, that is ego, ego illusion. Thing about ego, never will be satisfied. If there's anything in your life that is giving you self-love or that is giving you self-worth and it comes from another person and not from within yourself, that's codependency. And
Mm.
that's toxic. And that means if it can be given to you, that means it can be taken away.
Yeah. It definitely
Yeah.
seems like you were mentioning you didn't have a good self worth to begin with. Then you
Hmm.
find meaning and purpose, and they even give you a teaching role in this cult and this religion, and then it's then held over you that you're not good enough and you're not worthy and you're denied access that you were given previously. And so, yeah, it definitely, I can see the system of control there and how it kind of preyed upon you.
It's a cycle. They get people to do this, and it just makes them worse. It's like
Yeah.
you're broken, you're messed up, you need us. You can't, heal without us. You need a bishop, you need the sacrament, you need, this authority to make you better. But like the reality, what I really needed was to fucking love myself.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And you
You
needed
know, that's
someone, you
yeah.
need people just to love you for you.
Exactly. But like
Acceptance,
how
true
but it's
acceptance.
not it's a toxic positivity environment in the cult, in the Mormon
Hmm.
cult, because no one talks about the real things that need to be said. It's too taboo because there is judgment, and where there is judgment there is no unconditional love. There is no space to talk freely. People are going to look at you weird, and you can't be grateful at all. When you're judgmental, it completely cuts you off from gratitude and unconditional love.
Yeah, shame is such in many ways such a useless emotion because it convinces you to hide away, to deny that there's actually anything going on. It keeps you away from getting help, true real help from people. And ultimately, when you've come through shame, you look back. When you're looking back on shame, you're like, what did that really give me? Like,
Mhm.
you don't gain anything from shame. It
Yeah,
ostracizes, it locks away, it
exactly.
isolates.
It gives meaning to the ego,
Yeah.
but it's never satisfied.
You use a lot of interesting terminology. In fact, I wrote down quite a few terms that you've said, like shadow work, shadow self, cognition of duality, morality as a paradigm, sense of your authentic self, love your shadow self. And these are things that I'd love to have a part two, because I think this interview is really good for kind of highlighting the modes of control and I'd like to
Yes,
debrief a little bit of that. But I'd also love to really have you on again sometime and get into
sure.
your shadow work. I'd love to do a little research on Carl Jung um, but I would really love to have a part two where we can get into kind of your current philosophy, your sense of spirituality, because I think you're so fascinating, and I think a lot of the work that you've put in, that effort that you've done to better yourself, I'd love to give you a platform to kind of share that with other people.
I would love that. Yes.
Just to recap for to put a nice little bow on our kind of now we'll call it part one. But that is so identifying a few things is one. If I'm listening correctly, if I'm hearing correctly, it seemed like
Yes.
some of the issues that you ran into were the indoctrination of telling people to control people who control the truth, right? Trust the
Hmm.
prophet. This is Jesus's religion, and so everything that not man's religion. So everything that his prophets and his church do are correct, right? That kind of it really
Hmm.
seems like you're hitting on not being allowed to think for yourself through that.
Exactly.
Would you say that the
Yeah.
ultimate source of authority and control was definitely placed in the hands of the church?
Definitely. They don't like it when people put authority in their own control. They don't like that.
Yeah, it really
Because
seems.
because if it does that, it takes power away from them. Like, why need a prophet? If you can get divine personal revelation, why do we need a prophet? You
Yeah,
know,
one thing I'm
things
very
like
big
that.
on here at the Soul Ward is that people know what they believe and why they believe it, right? So
Hmm.
even if you're in our community and you're Catholic or you are part of a more systematic kind of religion, that's cool. You're welcome here, but know, why do you do it? Why do you do the sacraments? Why do you do that? What does it stand for? What are you actually doing, and what's the purpose behind it?
Hmm.
I think that's a big part of actually finding the real truth wherever that may be.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, I Nova, I just think you're so fascinating, and thank you so much for just having the courage to come on here and to share your perspective, because I think
Yes,
it's really going to help people who are in these
it is.
situations. Yeah,
It
like it.
is.
What would you say to
This
someone right now who's out there, maybe hearing this for the first time, and they might be thinking that they could possibly be in this situation? What advice would you give them, and what are some quick tips to look out for?
it kind of depends on where they're at. You know, Like for instance, like in the Mormon church, like lots of people just lie on their worthiness questions. Like a lot of people do. So like, don't feel bad, you know, about that. You know, like
Mm.
I don't know. It's just like it's really hard. Like if you're like in it and you don't want to be in it, you just have to fake it till you're out. You know,
Mm.
that's how I would do it. Like it's very hard. I never had to do that. You know,
Yeah.
but like
Would you say be honest with yourself then is key there?
you have to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
You have, but above all else, you have to love yourself as much as you possibly can. Otherwise, you'll just go back.
And that's
You have to instill, you know, your own boundaries. You have to create your own life. You know, we are all very unique and special. And I don't believe that we can find all of our truth in one place. I
mm.
feel like truth is ubiquitous, it's everywhere. You know, the thing about cults is like they want to monopolize that so they can control you. And I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like I want to have more to say, but the question is, you know, the statement you kind of gave is a little bit too general. But basically, when you know that when you experience something and you know you don't know what you want, but you know what you don't want, start from there.
Mm.
That's where I started. It's very scary. It's the unknown. You know, when it's a cult, they give you the path. They tell you, you know, what to do, what to think, and everything. They control every aspect of your life, right?
Yeah.
When you have to do that on your own, it's very scary
Mm.
because you don't know anything and you don't know where to start. But as long as you start, it doesn't matter. Just start, because when you start to find things that you do like, you can gravitate towards that, you know, and that way you can have a better contrast between what is it about this that you didn't like and what is it about this that you do like. That's what I had figured out, because you know, when before I knew I was in a cult, before I even knew like I was going through pretty much sexual abuse, like when I started learning non-duality, I started to put together, well, you know what, the things that I learned in religion, you know, like I used to like those, but then the things in spirituality, I kind of like it better. And it kind of actually exposes the ego in my religion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yeah,
And
that's what I would say.
seems like speaking with you and speaking with a few other people that I've talked with who have kind of come out of a system of control, be it a cult or just you know, over control from another source or an authoritarian. It seems like it all really starts with being honest with yourself and questioning things, because that seems to be the moment you're free to think, you're free to question, you're free to doubt. That seems to be just a the first stepping stone of a long path of self-discovery that I've seen within
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Well, Nova, you're fantastic. We're gonna we'll close out the podcast here, and then you and I will talk for a moment just about you know, scheduling a part two, because I really would love to hear about your shadow work, and I
Yeah.
really would love to kind of you know, explore that philosophy and get more deeper into just, you know, all these really really interesting terms. Again, there were illusion of the ego, shadow work, shadow self, cognition of duality, morality as a paradigm, sense of your authentic self, love your shadow self. Right? These are really good. I think really good terminologies that could really use some good definitions and probably a lot more time to explain them.
Yes,
But
yes. You know, just one thing, like
sure.
making, like talking to you and having this be on a platform, that's part of my shadow work.
Mm,
That's why I do it.
that's awesome.
Because exactly, because like when you become your authentic self and you share that with other people, it helps other people as well. You know, when we go through trauma and things like that, I feel like trauma was meant to be healed. And I
Mm.
also feel like we also go through our trauma so that when we do overcome it, we can be a part of someone else's survival guide. You
Oh,
know, we can inspire people. And that's like a better way of like seeing, you know, trials and trauma, because it gives hope to other people who are stuck. And you
mm.
could be that person that you needed when you were stuck, but to other people.
Yes, yeah, I am a big believer in that, and I love that. Yeah, I love that. And yeah, trauma becomes a tool for healers, a tool in their tool belt that we tap into our trauma to help other people. Yeah, I love that. Well, Nova, thank you so much for joining us in the Soul Ward, and everyone else. We'll go to the live chat here in a bit. Once we're live. Again, this is pre-recorded, but I'll see you guys around.